"There is a young lady at the door, your grace," said the butler, "and she has come alone on foot in the rain, and she will not give her name." The Duke of Halbrook did not look up from the letters spread across his desk. "Then she may go away again on foot in the rain. She says she is a Merrow." Gideon Hale set down his pen. The fire cracked in the grate. Outside, the October rain came off the fells and struck the black windows of Halbrook Castle in handfuls, like gravel thrown by a boy. Somewhere in the West Range a shutter banged and nobody went to mend it. "A Merrow," he repeated. "Yes, your grace." "Which one?" "The father is a coward, and I have already been told what the elder daughter is, at some length, by 3 separate men in 1 week." He rose. He was a very tall man, and rising was a thing he did slowly, the way a door swings shut. "Bring her to the small library. Have Mrs. Duckett stand inside the door and not leave it. And send for dry clothes. I will not have it said that a Merrow died of cold on my roof. That family has invented enough already." He went down to the small library and stood with his back to the fire and waited, and told himself that his heart was beating hard because he was angry. The door opened. She was small. That was the first thing. Small and soaked to the bone, and wearing a gown that did not belong to her. He saw that at once, and the seeing of it made something turn over coldly in his stomach. It was a fine gown, an evening gown, blue silk, cut low across the bosom and pinned hastily at the shoulder where it did not fit. And over it she wore a shawl she had plainly clutched together with both hands for 11 miles of open road, and beneath the hem of it her boots were the boots of a servant, cracked and mud to the ankle. Her hair had come down. There was a smear of chalk-white powder on her cheek, where the rain had got into whatever family had painted her with. She stood in the doorway of the Duke of Halbrook's library, in her sister's gown, dripping on his floor, and she looked at him without a particle of fear. "You are the Duke," she said. "I am. I am Prudence Merrow. I am Seraphina's sister. My father has sent me to persuade you to burn the letters." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice from which he had removed everything, "And how were you instructed to persuade me?" She did not blush. He almost wished she had. Her chin came up a fraction, and she said quite steadily, "My father said that your grace is a man like other men, and that I was to be agreeable, and that if I came home in the morning instead of the night, no one at Merrow would ask me a single question. I was to understand that the door would simply be shut behind me and never mentioned again." The rain hit the window. The shutter banged in the West Range. "He said that to you," said Gideon. "My mother said it," said Prudence Merrow. "My father only nodded. He is not a strong man, your grace. He agrees with whoever is in the room." She let go of the shawl, and it slid, and she caught it and pulled it up around her shoulders again with a fierceness that was not shyness at all, but something closer to disgust. "They put me in Seraphina's gown because they thought it would help. It does not fit. Nothing of hers ever has." Gideon Hale had spent 39 years learning to say nothing while he thought, and he had never been more grateful for the training they'd sent her. They had put paint on her face and cut silk on her shoulders and sent her 11 miles up a mountain road, alone at dusk, into the house of a man the county called the Blackfrost Duke. And they had done it not because they thought she would succeed, but because they did not greatly care what became of her. She was the second daughter. She was the plain one. She was the coin you spend when you have nothing else, and you do not weep over a spent coin. "Sit down," he said. "I would rather stand. Miss Merrow, you are going to fall down, and I have no wish to catch you, because Mrs. Duckett is watching, and she is a gossip." She sat. Mrs. Duckett, by the door, made a small noise of approval and pretended she had not. "Now," said Gideon, "you will drink that tea when it comes, and you will eat what is on the tray, and while you do it you will tell me why you came at all. Because you are not a fool. I can see that you are not a fool, and you knew before you set out that you would not do what they told you to do." "No," she agreed. "I knew that. Then why come?" Prudence Merrow put her wet hands flat on her knees. "Because if I did not come, they would have sent her maid's little sister instead," she said, and told her the same thing, and she is 15, and she would have done it. The fire cracked. Gideon turned and looked into it for a while, because he did not trust his own face. "The letters," he said at last. "Yes, you know what is in them. I know what my father says is in them. He says they are letters written by Seraphina to Mr. Crispin Vale, and that they are indiscreet, and that if they were read aloud in a certain drawing room in town she would be finished, and the family with her. Mr. Crispin Vale, said Gideon, is my cousin. He is 19 years old. His father died at sea and his mother died of grief, and I have had the raising of him since he was 11, and I have made, I dare say, a great many errors in the doing of it, but he is a good boy, and he is soft, and he has no more guard on him than a puppy in a coach road. He turned round. I have the letters, Miss Merrow, because Crispin brought them to me himself, weeping, 4 days ago, and I have read them, and I will tell you what is in them, since your father has not. She waited. They are not indiscreet, said the Duke of Halbrook. They are careful. They are the most careful letters I have ever read in my life. Every one of them is written to be shown to somebody else. Not one of them says a thing your sister could not defend before a bishop, and every single one of them described things she arranged at an hour she chose, at a place she named, and then writes it down afterwards as though he had begged her to come. He watched her. He did not spare her. Your sister was not compromised, Miss Merrow. Your sister was building a case, and she was building it against a 19-year-old boy with £40,000 and no father. The colour went out of Prudence Merrow's face very slowly, from the temples down, the way frost takes a window. That, she said, is not possible. Then tell me it is not. She stopped. She looked at her hands. And Gideon, watching her closely, because he was a suspicious man and had been one all his life, and had kept him and his household alive, saw the exact moment when a thing she had refused to look at for a long while finally turned and looked back at her. There were payments, she said. Go on. I keep my father's books. She said it flatly, as though it were a confession of something shameful. I have kept them since I was 17, 'cause he cannot, and my mother will not, and Seraphina laughed when it was suggested. There were payments in the spring, to an inn at Selby Cross, the bell for rooms in June, 4 separate nights. And there is a woman called Dawes on the household list at £8 a year, and she has never once been in the house. And I asked. My mother said she was Seraphina's dresser in town, and Seraphina has no dresser in town. She looked up. Her eyes were dry and enormous. I made a note of it in the margin, in pencil, and then I rubbed it out, Your Grace, because I did not want to know. The room was very quiet. The rain came on. Those people, Gideon said, would have gone on not wanting to know. Most people, said Prudence Merrow, are not the one who has to add up the column. And the Duke of Halbrook, who had not laughed in company for the better part of 2 years, heard a sound come out of himself that surprised the butler in the passage. He gave her supper. He gave her a room, the green room, in the east tower, with Mrs. Duckett installed in the dressing-room adjoining and the door left open, because he intended, if it killed him, that no living soul should ever be able to say one word about this night. And in the morning he came down expecting to find her gone, on foot in the rain, back to a house where the door would be shut behind her and never mentioned again. He found her in the muniment passage at 6:30, in a borrowed grey gown of Mrs. Duckett's niece's, with her sleeves pinned back, reading the parish charity accounts that had been left in a heap on the window seat for 11 weeks, because his aunt's last reader had run off to be married. These are wrong, she said without preamble. Good morning, Miss Merrow. Good morning. These are wrong. Somebody has entered the Michaelmas coal twice and taken the difference out of the widow's fund, and I do not think it was dishonesty. I think it was a person who cannot add. But the widows are £11 short, and it is October. She pushed her hair out of her eyes with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of ink across her forehead. Whose is this? My aunt's, said Gideon. Lady Otterlyn. She is 76 and she is blind, and she has administered the charities of this valley for 40 years by memory and by main force, and since March she has had nobody to read to her or write for her, and she is too proud to say so, and the widows are £11 short. Prudence Merrow put down the ledger. Your Grace, she said, I have no home to go back to. I did not do what I was sent to do, and my father will know it before noon, and my mother will not have me in the house. I have 9 shillings, a Bible, and a hand that does not block. If you will let me stay until Lady Otterlyn finds somebody better, I will read to her. and I will write for her, and I will find your £11, and I will ask you for nothing else in this world." Gideon Hale stood in the cold grey passage of the house he had held alone since he was 26, and looked down at a small ink-stained woman in a borrowed gown, and found that his heart was beating hard again, and that this time he could not honestly call it anger. "You will ask me for wages," he said, £30 a year, paid quarterly, and you will take them, Miss Merrow, and you will not argue, because a woman who is given nothing be sent anywhere, and I am done. I find I am entirely done with people being sent." She opened her mouth. "Not one word," said the Duke of Halbrook. "Come and meet my aunt." Lady Ottoline Hale received her new reader in a chair by the fire with her sightless eyes turned toward the door and her stick across her knees like a sceptre. "Merrow," she said. "Merrow, Merrow. There is a Merrow girl who has been making a nuisance of herself over my great-nephew. That is my sister, my lady. Is she a fool?" "No, my lady," said Prudence. "She is very clever. It would be much better for everyone if she were a fool." There was a silence of a length that made Gideon, standing by the window with his hands behind his back, consider whether he would have to intervene. Then his aunt began to laugh, and went on laughing until she had to be given water, so Prudence Merrow stayed. She read to Lady Ottoline in the mornings, the newspapers, the Psalms, and a great deal of correspondence from clergymen who wanted money and did not like to say so. She wrote in the afternoons. She found the £11 in 9 days, and then she found 40 more that nobody had known were there, sunk in an old bequest that had been faithfully reinvested by a lawyer who had died in 1809 and never mentioned to anybody since. She reorganized the coal charity, which had been administered by kindness, into a thing administered by kindness and arithmetic, and 81 families in the valley had fires in January who had not had them in December. And she did not once, in all that time, ask the Duke of Halbrook to burn her sister's letters. He noticed that. He noticed a great deal. He noticed that she rose before the servants, and that Mrs. Ducat had begun, unbidden, to leave a covered plate for her in the still room. He noticed that when Crispin came down to breakfast grey-faced and silent, as he did all through November, a boy who had been made a fool of and was ashamed to the marrow of his bones, she never once looked at him with pity, which would have finished him, but spoke to him instead about horses, and then about the drainage of the lower meadow, and then about his opinion of a lease, until by Christmas Crispin Vale had begun to walk into rooms like a man again. He noticed that she went out in all weathers to the cottages, and came back with her hem 6 inches deep in mud, and that she never mentioned where she had been unless she wanted something for somebody. He noticed, one black afternoon in December, standing in the door of the muniment room and not announcing himself, that she had fallen asleep over Lady Ottoline's ledgers with her cheek on her arm and the pen still in her fingers, and that she was thinner than she had been in October, and that there was a hole in the elbow of her grey gown mended so neatly it was nearly invisible, and he stood there far longer than a man ought, and then went away quietly and gave orders about a new gown that were received by his housekeeper, with an expression of profound and unbearable understanding. And he noticed, this was the worst of it, this was the thing he took out and turned over in his hands at 3 in the morning like a man with a stone in his shoe, that the house had begun to feel like a house. Halbrook had been a fortress for 13 years. His mother had died in it, in a locked room, in the 4th year of a scandal that she had not committed and could not disprove, a manufactured thing, a whisper, a set of letters produced by a woman who had wanted her husband and had been prepared to buy him with another woman's name. Gideon had been 16. He had watched a county he had known all his life close against her like a gate, and he had watched his father, who believed the whisper, who chose to believe it, because believing it was easier than fighting, leave her to it. And when she died, the same county had come to the funeral and worn black and said how sad, how very sad, and had gone home and eaten a good dinner. He had not forgiven any of them. He had not forgiven his father, who was dead. He had not, he suspected, forgiven himself for being 16 and afraid and silent, which was why he had not burned Seraphina Merrow's letters and never would, because he knew exactly what a manufactured scandal cost, and he had sworn a boy's oath in a cold church that he would never again stand in a room where one was being built and hold his tongue. He said none of this to anybody. He was not a man who said things. He said it to Prudence Merrow on the 22nd of December, in the long gallery at 11 o'clock at night, because she had asked him a perfectly ordinary question about a portrait, and he had opened his mouth and heard the whole of it come out of him in a level voice that he did not recognize, and could not stop, and did not, in the end, want to. When he had finished, she was standing quite still with candle in her hand, and the light of it was shaking. "Your Grace," she said. "Do not," he said. "Be kind to me. I could not bear it just at present." I was not going to be kind. She set the candle down on the sill, very carefully, as though it were the most important act of her life. "I was going to say that I have known you for 11 weeks, and I have not once heard you speak of her, and I thought, God forgive me, I thought you were cold. And you are not cold. You are the only warm thing in this county, and you have built 4 feet of stone round it, so that nobody may get at it again." She looked up at him. "It is a very sensible arrangement. I only wish somebody had thought to tell your mother that her son grew up to be a man who would have fought for her." Gideon Hale found he could not speak at all. They stood there in the dark gallery with a foot of cold air between them, and the candle burning low on the sill, and neither of them moved. And he was aware, with a clarity that terrified him, that if he took one step he would take her face in his hands, and that she would let him, and that he would then have done to her precisely what her family had sent her here to have done. So he did not take the step. He said, "Good night, Miss Merrow," in a voice like a shut door, and turned, and walked away down the gallery, and it was the hardest 100 feet he ever walked in his life. The letter from the Bell at Selby Cross came on the 3rd of January. She brought it to him herself, in the study, and laid it on the desk and stood back from it as though it were hot. "I wrote to the landlord in November," she said. "I told him I was settling my father's accounts and required the receipts for the summer. He has sent them. Your Grace, I did not tell you I had written, because I did not know what I should do if the answer came back the way I feared, and I did not want you to have to watch me decide. Gideon, read them. 4 nights at the Bell in June, taken and paid for by Sir Edmund Merrow, in his own hand. And a 5th in July, and a bill for a chaise sent from the Bell to fetch a gentleman from the Marchbury Road, on a date that Gideon knew, because it was written in a 19-year-old boy's confession 4 days before Christmas. As the knight Crispinvale had believed himself to be riding to a private rescue of a persecuted young lady from a cruel father. There was no father at the Bell. There was a bill for 4 bottles of claret and a supper for 2, signed by Sir Edmund Merrow himself at the very hour. Gideon set the papers down. "You know what this is," he said. "Yes. It is not merely your sister. Your sister could be called young and vain, and wickedly badly taught, and half the world would find a way to forgive her. This is her father in the same room, ordering the wine." He looked up. "Miss Merrow, if I use these, your family is finished. Not got about finished. Your father will be a byword in 3 counties, your mother will not be received, and your sister will not marry a curate, let alone a fortune. And you, and I will be the daughter who did it," said Prudence. Yes, she was very white. She had been white since she came into the room. "There is a boy in this house," she said, "who cannot look me in the eye because he was made a fool of, and he is 19, and it was my father who ordered the wine. If I ask you to burn those papers to spare my mother's dinner parties, then I am not a good woman who has been unlucky in her family, your Grace. I am simply the last of them." She drew a breath that shook. "Use them. Only, please, do not let me be in the room. I find I am not as brave as I sound." And the Duke of Halbrook stood up and came round the desk, and did the only thing he permitted himself in 5 months. He took her hand, the ink-stained one, and held it in both of his, and bowed his head over it, and said nothing at all. He never had the chance to use the papers, because on the 6th of January, at the 12th night ball that Halbrook had given every year for 200 years, and that Gideon had given for 13 with the manners of a man holding a wake, the doors of the great saloon opened at 10:30. When the whole county was assembled, and the chandeliers were burning, and Prudence Merrow was standing quietly beside Lady Otterlane's chair in a grey gown with a single white ribbon in her hair, and the footman announced Sir Edmund and Lady Merrow and Miss Seraphina Merrow. They had not been invited, and Seraphina Merrow came into the room in white silk and diamonds. beautiful as a struck match, and looked slowly around the glittering saloon until she found her sister, and she smiled. Gideon Hale had been a duke since he was 26, and he had learned in that time that a room of 200 people is a single animal with a single nerve, and that it can be made to turn its head by a whisper. The animal turned its head now. Sir Edmund Merrow came across the floor with his hand already out, a big pink genial man with a laugh like a dropped tray, saying something about the season and the roads, and how a father must be forgiven for coming to fetch his own daughter home, and behind him came his wife in puce. And beside him, on his arm luminous, came Seraphina. She was, Gideon conceded, extremely beautiful. She was beautiful the way a scaffold is well made. "Your Grace," said Sir Edmund, "you must think us shockingly rustic, arriving so, but we are neighbours, after a fashion, and a family should be together at 12th night, and I have been quite distracted, at having my little Prudence away so long." "You have not written to her," said Gideon. The laugh faltered. "I beg your pardon? In 5 months, Sir Edmund, you have written to your daughter 3 times. I know, because she reads her letters at the breakfast table, and there have been 3. The first asked whether the business was concluded. The second asked whether the business was concluded. The third informed her that her room at Merrow had been given to a cousin." Gideon's voice had not risen. "It did not need to. You did not come to fetch her home. You have no home to fetch her to. You came because the county is beginning to talk, and it is not talking about her." Somewhere behind him a fan snapped shut. And it was then that Seraphina Merrow stepped past her father, into the open floor, into the full light of the chandeliers, and spoke clearly, sweetly, pitching her voice exactly as far as it needed to go, which was to the walls. "Oh, your Grace," she said, "do not scold him. It is not my father's fault. We have all been so ashamed." The room went entirely still. "You must understand," Seraphina said, turning a little, so that the light took her diamonds and her tears. She had produced tears. Gideon watched her produce them the way a conjurer produces a coin. "We sent her to you in October. We sent my poor plain sister up to Halbrook in the dark, in my gown, with my paint on her face, to buy your silence with the only thing she had." She pressed a hand to her breast. "We were desperate and we were wicked, and I have not slept since. And now it is January, and she is still here, and she is wearing grey and calling herself a secretary, and the whole county is asking what a duke wants with a plain little drudge who has no chaperone, and no character and no name left." "Seraphina," said Sir Edmund in a strangled voice, because even he had begun to understand. "And I have come to take her home," Seraphina finished, radiant, ruinous, "before there is nothing left of her at all. That is all. That is the whole of my crime, your Grace. I love my sister." It was, Gideon thought with a strange cold admiration, the most efficient piece of murder he had ever witnessed in a drawing room. She had confessed to everything and accused him of everything in the same breath. She had sold her sister twice, once in October for a bribe, and once in January for a reputation, and she had done it while weeping. 200 people turned together to look at the small woman in grey standing by the old blind lady's chair. Prudence Merrow did not weep. She did not run. She stood with her hands folded and her chin up, exactly as she had stood in the doorway of his library in a gown that did not fit, dripping on his floor, and Gideon saw the muscle move in her jaw and knew what it was costing her, and knew that not one other person in that room could see it. He crossed the floor. He did not go to Seraphina. He walked the whole length of the saloon, past the Lord Lieutenant, past the bishop's wife, past every mouth in the county of Wardale, and he stopped in front of Prudence and held out his hand. She looked at it. "Take it," he said quietly. "I am about to be very indiscreet, and I should like a witness." And she put her hand in his. Gideon turned with her hand in his and faced the room. "Miss Seraphina Merrow," he said, "has told you the truth. It is the only time in her life she has done it by accident, so let's all be grateful, and let us have the rest of it." He raised his voice, not much. "Yes. In October her family sent her sister to this house, alone and unchaperoned at night, to trade herself for a bundle of letters. That is exactly what happened, and Miss Prudence Merrow walked 11 miles in the rain and stood in my library and told me, in the first minute, what she had been sent to do, and then refused to do it. She was not ruined here. She was offered it, and she declined it, and I have been ashamed of my own sex ever since." He looked once at Sir Edmund. As for the letters, Crispin. The boy came out of the crowd. He was white to the lips, but he came. "Tell them," said Gideon, and Crispin Vale, 19 years old, in his first evening coat, said in a voice that cracked and then steadied, "I was courted, and I was flattered, and I was led to an inn at Selby Cross 5 times in the summer to rescue a lady from a cruel father. And the cruel father was in the parlour below with a bottle of claret and had ordered the chaise himself." He swallowed. "I am a great fool. I have been a fool since June, but I am not a liar, and neither is she." "The receipts," said Gideon, "are in my study, in Sir Edmund's own hand, and the landlord of the Bell will swear to them at any assize in England. I have had them since the 3rd of January. He let that settle. I have not used them. I have not used them because the woman who obtained them asked me to, and then, having asked me to, sat down and wept, because they would destroy her mother. And I found I could not do to her what her family has done to her all her life, which is to spend her." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Lady Ottoline Hale, blind in her chair, was smiling like a woman at a play. "Sir Edmund," said the Duke of Halbrook, "you will be out of this house in 10 minutes, and out of this county by Lady Day, and you will go quietly, because if you do not, I will read those receipts aloud in the assize court at Marchbury and let the newspapers do the rest. Take your wife. Take your elder daughter." He paused. "You may not take mine." The word went through the room like a stone through ice. Prudence's hand jerked in his. "Your Grace," she whispered. Gideon turned his back on the whole county of Wardale. "Prudence," he said. And his voice was not level any more, and he did not care, and every soul in that saloon heard it. "You came up my drive in a gown that did not fit you, because they told you you were worth nothing, and every day since you have been the most valuable person in this house. And I have known it since the 9th of October, and been too much of a coward to say so. I did not speak, because I could not bear to be one more man who wanted something from you." He drew a breath. "So I will not ask for anything. I will offer this house, and my aunt who is fonder of you than of me and says so, and that ridiculous boy who would go over a cliff for you, and my name, which is old and cold and has been waiting 140 years for somebody to make it warm, and me. Chiefly me, and I am aware that is the poorest part of it." He went down on one knee in front of 200 people on the polished floor of the great saloon of Halbrook. "Marry me," said Gideon Hale. "Not to save you. You have saved yourself twice already, and you did not need me either time. Marry me because I have not been able to hear the door open in 5 months without hoping it was you." Prudence Merrow put both hands over her mouth. Then she took them away, and there were tears on her face. And she was laughing, and she said, in a voice that carried to the very back of the room, "Yes, yes, I will, you great cold impossible man. I have loved you since the night you told me to sit down." He was on his feet. He did not remember standing. He remembered only that she came into his arms as though she had been walking toward that spot her whole life, and that he held her there in front of the bishop's wife and the Lord Lieutenant and the assembled malice of 3 counties, and put his hand against her wet cheek, and bent his head to hers, and that somewhere at the edge of the world Lady Ottoline Hale began to bang her stick on the floor, and the county, the same county that had shut its gate against his mother, began uncertainly and then thunderously to applaud. The Merrows left within the 10 minutes. Lady Merrow fainted or announced that she would, and found that no one had arranged to catch her. Sir Edmund said nothing at all, which was, his younger daughter observed afterwards, the first honest thing he had done in years. Seraphina paused at the door. She looked back at her sister once, at the plain one, the second one, the coin, and something crossed her lovely face that was not anger and was not shame, but was, Gideon thought, a kind of astonishment, as though a woman who had spent her whole life reading a book had turned it over and found writing on the back. Then she went out into the snow, and Halbrook shut its doors. They were married in March in the Valley Church, and the 81 families who had had fires in January filled it to the walls and stood in the churchyard besides. She wore grey. She would not be dissuaded. She said the county had seen her in silk once, and it had not gone well, and she preferred to be married in her own clothes to her own man. Lady Ottoline lived another 9 years, and heard her great-nephew's children learn their letters, and died with her hand in the hand of the Duchess of Halbrook, who had read to her every morning of those 9 years without missing one. Crispinvel married a squire's daughter with a loud laugh and no diamonds whatever, and named his first son after his cousin, and was tiresomely happy for 50 years. And the Duke of Halbrook, the Blackfrost Duke, who had held a fortress alone for 13 years, grew old in a house that was not a fortress any more. The letters were never used. He gave them to his wife on their wedding night in a box, and she burned them herself in the study grate, one by one, and watched them go, and then she turned round and found him standing in the doorway watching her, as he had watched her that first grey morning in the muniment passage, and she said, "You are staring, your grace." "I am," said Gideon Hale. "You are the only thing in this house I did not inherit." And he crossed the room and took her ink-stained hand in both of his, and did not let it go again for 40 years.